Donald and Douglas McIntosh stand in front of 108 Mifflin Street, a big white house in a small coastal town just below the Scottish-English border. They stand and they stare. Everything about it is pristine, immaculate. It's not new by any means, but definitely newer than a lot of the buildings in Britain's small towns. In fact, this entire town is entirely newer than what they are used to. Eva and Leia had said it was due to the curse. Donald, Douglas, and Rosie think that for a cursed town, it's pretty nice. Now, the boys have donned their best kilts, stand in front of their mother's house, their sisters safely back with the engines. They had insisted that they should go alone first, to scope it out and make sure it's safe, to make sure they weren't making a terrible mistake. But there is nothing untoward about the house, nearly a mansion, only, in the boys' minds, it is just the type of beauty one might use to hide something treacherous. They can't help but feel like they're walking on eggshells, poking at a poisonous flower. After all this time spent wondering, what if she is as awful as the worst of the long line of foster homes they'd been in? What if she doesn't want them, or worse, only wants Eva and Leia, whose father she'd loved? They won't tell her about the girls, then. We'll only bring them once they deem it safe. If they deem it safe. Their sisters mean too much to them. They simply can't risk being separated again. They ring the doorbell. It takes too long for an answer to come, and old habits die hard as their fingers entwine, something they used to do as bairns in times of stress. The woman who answers is the spitting image of Eva and Leia, with brown eyes to match their own, and beauty to rival the island-spattered seas of the Hebrides. "Can I help you?" she asks, and they unfreeze, hands hastily ripping away from each other. Donald starts, and it's obvious he's nervous. "Are you Regina Mills?" Douglas finishes for him. She looks at them closely. "Yes," she says. "But who are you? I've not seen you in town before." They shift uncertainly. Donald speaks. "My name's Donald, and I'm Douglas." Douglas adds, He falters. "We're your sons," Donald finishes for him. She freezes, stares a bit. Her hand clenches around the edge of the door. "No, you're not," she says. They hadn't expected this to be easy. "I only have one living son, and he's with his birth family now," she continues. They exchange a glance before Douglas answers. "People lie, you ken." "Yes," she cuts him off, "and you're not very adept at it. Now please, leave, before I have you arrested for trespassing." She goes to shut the door, but Donald, muttering "Christ" under his breath, jams his foot in it to prevent it, and braces his hand just above hers on the door. For a second she looks frightened, but it's gone just as fast. "If you dinna trust our word, lass, then trust in this." He retrieves a silver pocket watch from his sporran and offers it to her. The name engraved on the front is that of their grandfather, Henry. She recognizes it immediately. "Where did you get this?" she demands, as she snatches it from Donald's hand. "So you're thieves too, are you?" she sneers. "Typical." She goes to slam the door in their faces again. This time, Douglas catches it, pries it open, and more or less invites himself and his brother into the foyer. Forceful but not rude, or at least not any more than she's being. Donald grabs back the pocket watch. It's theirs. Their grandfather obviously wanted them to have it, and takes a deep breath. "We didna die like your father told ye. He sent us away through the stone circle near your castle, and it brought us here, to another one in Scotland. We were found by someone from Inverness and put in foster care. where we stayed until we were 12, when we ran away. There's more to that, but we'll no go into it now. Your father did what he did to protect us. He knew how we'd end up if we were raised by our father. We had a pretty shite childhood, but it could have been worse, and it led us to ken the freedom we do now. We saw things we will not be able to unsee anytime soon, but it made us better men for it. So if you want us to leave, we will. We wouldn't have blamed you for no wanting anything to do with us after what our father did to you. He gasps in a breath when he finally finishes, and they wait. She stares back, breath bated, and eyes wide as she struggles to comprehend what she's just been told. The silence extends a bit, and the boys shift nervously. We were found, the both of us, wrapped in a black knit blanket with red trim, swaddled together. I dinna ken if you gave us names or no, but if you did, we didna retain them, and we dinna ken what they might have been, so we're hoping the rest will be proof enough. Douglas speaks. They think maybe they finally gotten through to her when they see tears forming in her eyes, and they wait to see what she says. Leopold and sky blue. The boys wrinkle their noses, horrified. I take it our father chose those, says Douglas. He never even asked me, she replies. Donald rolls his eyes. Typical. Well, at least sky itself isn't too bad. Leopold, though, Christ, it sounds like a gross old English king. I'm glad we didn't retain those, eh, Dougie? If they were physical objects, I'd burn them. There's a sob from nearby, and before the twins realize it, they've been engulfed in a hug by their mother. They're just a bit taller than she is with her heels, and their hands land instinctively on her shoulders as they let her hold them, even as a little voice in their heads cry, "You're home, you're home." Donald, in just the way he does with their sisters, rests his forehead against her hair and whispers in a voice thick with emotion, "In all the times we said we didn't need a mother, we never meant we didn't want one." The house is just as immaculate on the inside as it is on the outside. They've actually lived in a few pretty nice houses, including a stately old estate in the Highlands, but this tops them all. The kitchen itself is just about as big as some of the smallest crofts they've lived in. The girls deserve a place like this, they think, as they take it all in. So what part of Scotland are you from? I happen to know the town sheriff spent her childhood bouncing between Glasgow and Edinburgh. Regina speaks, as she sits a pair of steaming mugs on the counter in front of them. They jar from their thoughts to the scent of hot tea and biscuits. Ugh, everywhere really. Highlands, islands, cities, you name it, we've lived there, says Donald. We've been away up to Shetland even, though that was a bit of a last resort. No one else wanted us then. Her smile fades. Why not? Douglas leans against the counter as he takes a sip of it from his mug. Well, there are to us, for a start. There were times when we had to fight tooth and nail to stay together. Donald shakes his head. They separate sibling groups all the time in care. Sometimes it can't be helped, but it's the ones that are willing to separate twins that didn't deserve their jobs, he says darkly. Aye, his brother agrees. But anyway, do you remember the stone circle we mentioned earlier? Regina nods. Yes, I remember the one near my castle, but I never went over there. I always thought it had something to do with the fairies. Right, said Douglas. People think the same of Craignadoon, the one in the Highlands. You'll hear locals refer to it as the Fairy Hill or the Fairy Circle. Since we were found there, some folks branded us as changelings. They thought we were the wee folk. And if they were smart enough to believe that, They were still wary of taking us since they didn't ken where we did come from. Treated us more or less like stray cats who might have had any number of nasty diseases, Donald adds. They look up from their mugs to see their mother with tears in her eyes. She hastily wipes them away as they come around to her. "Och, dinna cry, lass. We're no any worse for wear, I promise," Donald says, a hand resting gently on her arm. She smiles tearfully and raises a hand to both their faces. "My handsome boys, you don't look like him at all. I was so afraid you would." Donald chuckles. "That didn't help our case, you ken. The wee folk are said to be terribly bonny." Regina is about to reply when they hear the front door open and close and heeled footsteps in the foyer. "Regina, I'm home," a female voice calls. "In the kitchen, mother," their mother calls back. Donald and Douglas look at her sharply, alarm poorly masked. "Your mother lives here?" Regina looks back quizzically. "Yes, why? I don't suppose you know anything about her, do you?" "We ken a fair bit more than you do, I'll wager," Donald mutters, just as the woman in question walks in. Her coloring is more like Rosie's than Regina's. Her hair is a shade of red-brown, and her skin, while not white like Rosie's, is lighter than Regina's olive tone. Her eyes are brown and seem to shimmer with her smile, which shifts a bit in question when she sees them. "Who's this, dear? You didn't mention we were having company." Before anyone can answer, Douglas grabs his brother's arm and practically drags him from the room. "Donnie, come here," he says as he drags him out into the hall. "Do you ken who that is in there?" Donald nods. "Aye, do you?" "Of course I do. We didn't plan for this. How are we supposed to just leave now?" "We won't. Dougie, calm down, and for Christ's sake, keep your voice down," Donald hisses back. But then Douglas stops, breathes, and abruptly switches to Gaelic, Avil Shintor, and Calcan, and Show Maha. "Chanil Savilcha." Donald answers in kind, and the conversation continues in their native tongue, until Regina and Cora step out of the kitchen, at which point they abruptly stop and turn to face them. "Is everything all right, you two?" Regina asks. "Oh, aye, it'll do," says Donald, but he doesn't take his eyes off his grandmother. Later, while Regina is making dinner, they sneak off under the guise of setting the table and catch her alone. "Well," says Cora. They're standing at the far end of the dining room, voices low. "I take it you know more about me than I do about you, my dear grandsons." Donald sneers as he paces. "What's the matter?" "We've never even met," Cora goes on. He spins around to face her then. "If you were a man, I'd hit you, but you're no, and I'll no hit a lady," he tells her. "She deserves a hell of a lot more than that," Douglas growls, spinning to face her with his arms crossed. "Tell me, how the hell do you do it? Living here and lying to your own daughter every day, like you didn't almost kill your own granddaughters. She sighs. So you met them then? Are they all right?" "That's all you've got to say for it? Are they all right?" "Aye, now. They were half dead when we found them, and they did nothing but eat and sleep for months. Are still so weak they canna hardly walk, but they're no dead if that's what you're asking." Donald has to work to keep his voice down now. She seems relieved. "Good. Now, I don't know what exactly they told you, but if you know them, you must know about magic." It's Douglas, then, who lets out a humorless chuckle. "Here come the excuses, Donnie. This ought to be good." Donald takes a step forward and leans an elbow on Douglas's shoulder. "Tell us something good then, lass." She continued on right where she'd left off. I didn't have my heart then, literally, but I do now, and I've changed. Oh, I? The boys raised identical eyebrows. So, if you saw them again, you wouldn't be a threat? You wouldn't harm them? She shakes her head. Never again. I punished them for crimes they didn't commit and things they had no control over. I won't forgive myself for it, and I certainly don't expect forgiveness from them. But you have my word that no more harm will come to them by my hand, or my magic. They look at each other and back at her. They can tell by the look in her eyes that she's being truthful, but they can't just trust her like that, can they? We'll hold you to that then, you can. You even look at them, find yourself quite closely acquainted with that blade of my dirk, Donald threatens. He pulls the dirk in question from his belt as if to show he isn't bluffing. It has a nasty 12-inch blade set in a hilt of dark wood with an uncertain origins to match its owner. He holds it up for a good look. You wouldn't have liked that now, would you? He asks. Cora smirks at their protectiveness. Now, I gave you my word there's no need for violence. Douglas looks up from inspecting his own dirk. We'll leave that decision in your hands, I think. You hurt them, we hurt you. A reasonable deal, she agrees. It's weird to eat without first seeing their sisters fed. They've called them a couple times throughout the day to check on them, including once just before dinner to make sure they have something. They had left plenty within easy reach, but they want to be sure, but they can't shake the anxiety. They've never been away from Eva and Leia since they met, and they haven't been away from Rosie since their reunion with her. The idea of their sisters, still so small and frail, being alone all day makes them uneasy. It would be too easy for something bad to befall them all alone in the engine cab. It doesn't help when their mother insists they stay the night. They don't have an excuse that doesn't involve their sisters, and they don't want to disappoint her, so they agree. She smiles so brightly when they do. Maybe, they think, she's always longed for more children to fill this big empty house. There are 3 empty bedrooms upstairs. One of them, they notice, is very clearly decorated for a little princess. Douglas looks at her quizzically. I thought you said your adoptive kid was a lad. He is, she replies. That's his room there. She points to the door at the end of the hall. Donald frowns. Whose is this, then? She doesn't respond right away, just staring into the unoccupied room. Several years after I had you, I had a little girl. Your father wouldn't let me keep her because he didn't want another daughter to overshadow his daughter with his first wife. So he took her from me and sent her through the stones. I tried to find her when I came here. That's why this is here. They glanced at each other. Clearly, they think, she's referring to Rosie. What did she look like? They ask, certain. She was perfect. She had this shock of red hair, and her eyes were bright blue, not dark like newborns usually have. Her skin was white. I thought she was sick at first. But she kicked and screamed so loudly, I knew she was fine. She smiled tearfully, remembering. I don't suppose I'll ever find her. I don't even know if she's still alive. The boys squeeze her hands in comfort. I wouldn't be so certain, lass. They venture off into one of the other rooms then, and once she's gone, they call their sisters. Rosie's a bit upset when they tell her they're spending the night, and asks them if they're ever going to come back. They respond, voices low and comforting. Oh, lass, of course, dinna fash. We'll see you in the morning. Would you like to meet our mam?